Welcome to All Things Work. I'm your host, Ann Sparacco. Did you know that deskless workers comprise of 70 to 80% of the global workforce? Well, these workers make up such a large portion of our workforce, yet retaining and engaging these essential employees has serious and many unique hurdles for organizations. Today, we're exploring the latest research on this invaluable population from SHRM and Fidelity Investments to help organizations better support and retain these workers. And joining us today is Ragan Decker, Manager of Enterprise and Executive Network Research at SHRM, who contributed to our recent series of reports on deskless workers. Ragan, welcome to All Things Work.
Thank you for having me. I am excited to be here to talk about such an important segment of the workforce.
It really is important. I know we've spoken on this quite a bit on this research, collaborated on, getting the word out too. It really hit home for someone like me who worked as a deskless worker for several years as a news reporter before actually coming to SHRM. So I was really able to, feel so connected to this research. It felt like it really hit home for me. So I'm excited to really dive into this discussion today. So let's start off. Can you share a bit more about a bit of background about this research series?
I think a great place to start is, what do we mean when we say deskless worker? So, as you mentioned, they are a massive and diverse group of workers, and our research really aimed to shed light on the unique experiences and challenges of this group. So, deskless workers, they include anyone who does not primarily work at a desk. So you can think retail associates, construction crews, healthcare professionals, manufacturing workers, hospitality workers, and so many more. And as you can tell from that list, deskless worker roles really vary so much in terms of their day to day responsibilities, their income, their education level, their specialization. And as you mentioned, they make up an estimated 70 to 80% of the global workforce. And to me, that's kind of really just staggering when you think about it.
Yeah, it's really staggering just how much of the workforce, these workers make up, and also just the variety of the types of roles they're actually in. A lot of people might be surprised at what types of jobs are actually considered deskless, because not all of us have like a perfect inside window to these positions. So what exactly drove the direction of SHRM and Fidelity's research, and how can the report actually help organizations?
Yeah. So, what drove the research is really the realization that while these workers are so essential to so many industries, so many organizations, they're often grouped together or studied as part of just the broader workforce in so many research studies. And there really is not a focus on their unique challenges, their unique needs. And so the reports that we developed with Fidelity Investments really aim to help organizations better understand the experiences of deskless workers, the experiences of HR professionals working to manage deskless workers, and try to address these challenges, help them overcome any hurdles that they're experiencing. And then hopefully to help improve things like retention, employee satisfaction, benefits engagement, productivity. So, really, not only helping organizations, but also in the end, helping deskless workers too.
Exactly. And you talked about some of the unique challenges, HR professionals face in these types of industries. So we have another SHRM report, and it said that they do face quite a few challenges when it comes to managing deskless workers versus office-based workers. So you touched on this a little bit, but let's elaborate a little bit more. Like, what exactly are some of those challenges?
Yeah, of course. So, talent management challenges exist across all employee groups. So, I think it's important to start there. But in our research, we found that HR professionals report significantly more difficulty managing their deskless workers than office based employees, just as you said. And this isn't a small gap. Like, this is something that we consistently find across many different HR practice areas. For example, workplace safety is a much greater challenge for deskless workers. Now, I think this makes sense with the more physically demanding nature of the work, and also just sometimes the hands-on nature of those kinds of roles. But even beyond safety, HR professionals also struggle with issues such as attendance and absenteeism, retention, onboarding, learning and development, just to name a few, and even in helping employees enroll and utilize their benefits. And personally, I think that these challenges really highlight the need for those tailored strategies to better support and connect with this essential segment of the workforce.
Yes, and I think I relate a lot to, like you talked about the physical safety. It kind of just makes a lot more sense because a lot of these deskless workers are also facing the public a lot more. So they're facing different types of environments rather than maybe a secured office building. I know for me personally, as a reporter, I was never in the office. I was never in the newsroom. I was constantly out in these different neighborhoods talking to different people every single day. Sometimes it was a breaking news situation where we'd be out following a shooting and we'd have to make sure we were very safe about the situation. So that part I relate to a lot. And the industry that I came from also had, a high turnover rate. So that honestly touches a lot with the retention challenge, as you mentioned. So I would love to dig a little bit more into that section of that kind of challenge. So in the SHRM report called From Turnover to Tenure, Insights for Retaining Deskless Workers, one of the key findings focused on HR's assumptions about deskless workers and high turnover. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we asked HR professionals whether they view turnover as inevitable among their deskless and office space workers. And we found that 85% of HR professionals say that turnover among deskless workers is inevitable as compared to 71%. Now, of course, some amount of turnover is inevitable, but I think here it's important to focus on that slight difference that we're seeing between office-based workers and deskless workers. And this perception is likely influenced by these long-standing views that deskless roles might be temporary or maybe transient. One member we talked to even mentioned how deeply ingrained this idea is, and that it's something that it's a really tough mindset to change. But our research, I think, it really challenges this perception, this assumption. Um, we found that 64% of deskless workers do not view their roles as temporary. And we found that 86% report feeling engaged in their work. And so I think really the takeaway here is that it's both possible as well as worthwhile to invest in retaining these workers.
Yes, exactly. Like you said, it's a really a mindset, a tough ingrained mindset to shift, but not impossible. So what recommendations would you have based on the research, for HR teams or workplace leaders to challenge these assumptions, to challenge this mindset about, that thinking you can't do much about this high turnover rate?
Yeah, so I think it's crucial. I think oftentimes we'll say, well, like, let's look at the data. And I think in this case, if we're looking at just turnover data, well, then we might actually be confirming some existing assumptions we have, right? So we can talk about that later, but like we do see some differences in terms of turnover rate between US workers and office based employees. But what I think that looking at just the turnover rate does is that it really ignores the what's the root cause of this. And so to try to break down these assumptions, it's looking at the full picture, maybe looking at engagement rates. Maybe it's talking to managers or also just talking to deskless workers to try to understand and get an understanding of what they're looking for in their role and how they're viewing work as a great place to start.
Right. And so we talked about that turnover rate. I think we mentioned it. If we didn't, it's 1.6 times higher than office based workers. That's the turnover rate for deskless workers. So you said there's quite a few things that can contribute to this. Can you walk us through some of that?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, in our research, we found that the turnover rate among deskless workers is higher than office based workers. And I think, like, taking a step back, one thing that I found was really interesting is that this really confirms what many HR professionals have been observing in their own organizations and reporting back to us, because the idea that retention is more challenging among the deskless workers. Because in our first report, we asked them about how challenging retention is, and many of them were saying it is more challenging. And so then in our second report, we wanted harder metrics, and so we asked about turnover rates, and we did find that there is that discrepancy. So I think the interesting question is, like, why is this happening? And part of the disparity can likely be attributed to the kinds of jobs that fall under the dustless category. Sectors like healthcare, retail, food service, they do just often naturally have tend to be more high churn. For example, in our research, we found that healthcare the turnover rate was significantly higher as compared to the government sector, as an example. But I think what's important to know is that even though we see those differences across industries, we still see across the board, government sector included, for those deskless workers, it's still higher than office space workers. But beyond just those industry factors, I think that this gap just really highlights that there are likely underlying challenges that deskless
Right.
workers are facing. And we can talk a little bit more later about like why they're leaving, why they're staying. But I think that it really just points to this idea that there are likely, we need to really understand the root causes for this turnover.
Exactly. I think it's not extremely surprising about the healthcare industry, just because it is such a stressful, intense type of role to have, and you're talk about shift changes and everything. So I think that's like a great example of, the challenges that people can easily picture. I can't imagine working in the healthcare industry. It's probably very challenging. So let's dig deeper into some of the retention challenges at different stages of an employee's tenure. So from our reports, 53% of HR professionals say retention for deskless workers is more challenging within their first year. I think you mentioned this a little bit. So what specific challenges do organizations face during this critical period, that first year, trying to, keep that talent there?
Yeah. So we have some great insights from our members into this to try to provide a little bit more context and color of like why are we seeing that retention is more of a challenge in that first year. So one member noted that deskless workers often leave for higher pay because they don't fully understand their culture and they don't fully understand the company's values and just like how important that is and how much they could get out of that. And so I think taking a step back in this current economic environment with the financial pressures, with the rising cost of living, makes sense that people are looking to potentially leave because of financial reasons. But I think what this points to is this idea that communicating your company's culture and values from that very first interaction. So thinking of day one as being that first interaction with a potential candidate could really help mitigate this. By showcasing your values early on, communicating your culture, you can really create a foundation for engagement before day one. And another HR professional actually shared with us that early engagement is key, and that especially during the crucial first 2 weeks is what this member said. But I would even go back to like, it's really that day one, that first interaction. Um, and then also, we heard that sometimes just the physicality of deskless jobs can also present challenges. People sometimes just don't understand maybe what they're signing up for or what the nature of the job is really going to be. And so that's why providing realistic job previews could be one way to potentially mitigate this. But just overall, I think this short window, it presents both challenges but also opportunities for organizations. On the one hand, it means organizations kind of have very little time to make that strong first impression, but it also means that HR has an opportunity to create an intentional, high impact onboarding and early engagement experience, and that could really impact early turnover.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've met a couple people who maybe joined the healthcare industry or the news business, having kind of an idea of what to expect, especially maybe fresh out of college. And I think it's really great to get that kind of realistic perspective and clear understanding of expectations, culture, everything in the onboarding process. That way they're not blindsided. I feel like when they're blindsided, it hits a little harder. So that's a really good point to make. And, our reports also discovered not just why these deskless workers don't want to stay in their jobs, but actually why they may want to actually stay. So turn it into a little bit of positivity here. So can you walk us through some of those reasons and how employers can really create a strong sense of stability? I know you touched on it a little bit when it comes to that first year, but how can they keep on going?
Yeah. So one thing I really liked about this research is that we also asked, so why among the people who were saying they were likely to stay in their job for the next 6 months, we asked them why. And the number one reason was job stability. I think we cannot underestimate the idea that the value of having a stable job. It really carries real value. But then the next most common reasons were work-life balance and satisfaction with their work arrangement as well as their schedule. Now, in many office settings, employees benefit from both stability and also flexibility in their hours. So maybe it's a consistent 9 to 5, 9 to 6, or a hybrid structure. And they often do have some autonomy in their hours. So maybe you have a doctor's appointment and you need to come in late for an hour. Deskless workers, on the other hand, often experience the opposite. Their schedules are often rigid, they're often unstable, they might be last minute. And so when deskless workers find a work arrangement or a schedule that works for their life, then they're saying, I'm more likely to stay. And now another interesting reason why people said that they're staying is relationships. And that's both with supervisors as well as coworkers. Now, people are just more likely to feel that sense of connection with their job when they have these relationships. And what we heard from SHRM members is that these relationships are retention tools. They're not just nice to haves. And I think too is that oftentimes we might think of these relationships as like out of the organization's hands. Maybe it's not something HR can really influence. They happen naturally or they don't. But some of our members that we've talked to have talked about how intentional connection can really make a difference. Because many of these deskless workers, they're working independently. They're on the move from job site to job site. They have variable schedules. So maybe they're not working with the same individuals on a regular basis, or maybe they don't have a communal workspace or daily team meetings. So even these brief moments of connection that could be facilitated, like a check-in or even just a thank you or asking someone about their weekend can really go a long way.
Yes, I agree. I think, like you said, they're away from maybe the main area where managers might be in their offices, so that these workers are kind of out doing the job day to day, and they're also tired, so they're probably just like, I just want to go home right now, especially if it's a physically demanding day. So it's very important for these managers to maybe have that one-on-one time to connect, saying, hey. I may know kind of what's going on out in the field, get it just based on reports back, but tell me from your perspective, is there anything you're seeing that you want changed or you're happy about something? Literally just that feedback even helps the manager realize what's going on in the field. So, yeah, I love that. I love that point. And we know that beyond the manager's one-on-ones, getting competitive compensation and benefits are also widely used as a retention strategy. However, the data from our research series reveals it might not be actually the most effective. So that was a little surprising to me. So can you walk us through how HR can refine these offerings to better align with deskless workers and their needs and priorities, since they're so different from the desk workers and office workers?
Yeah. So, kind of just taking a step back. So, in our research, we wanted to understand not only how effective a strategy was, but also how prevalent it is. So, we showed HR professionals a list of possible retention strategies. We asked them which ones they use. And then we followed that up with, well, now tell us how effective these have been in retaining deskless workers. Now, looking across those two pieces of information, prevalence and effectiveness, um, competitive compensation was found to be the most effective and common retention strategy. To me, the fact that compensation is at the very top of the list, not surprising. It is one of the top reason for why deskless workers are saying they're leaving. But what I do think is interesting is that competitive benefits was very common, but it wasn't as effective as competitive compensation, which I think is interesting because oftentimes we think about compensation and benefits together. It's your total rewards package. And we also know that one of the number two reason for seeking a new job is for better benefits. So you would think it would also be at just as highly effective as compensation. And so there really might be opportunities within the benefit space to enhance the effectiveness of benefits. And so part of that could be enhancing the offering itself, uh, maybe just getting a better understanding of the benefits that deskless workers value. which is a challenging task in its own right. But I think it's important to not just look at utilization rates when trying to understand what a deskless worker values, because in our research, we found that benefits enrollment and utilization among deskless workers is a challenge. And so you might have a great offering in place. It might even be an offering that deskless workers value, but they aren't aware of what you offer and how to take advantage.
Awesome. Yeah. So there's, like you mentioned, some key barriers here to reaching deskless workers with benefits. Can you tell us more about what those key barriers are and how organizations can really address them? Because this is essential.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about how deskless jobs are structured, and the challenges that can create for communication. And deskless workers, they don't have work email addresses sometimes. They probably aren't spending their days checking email either. They might work night shift or have irregular schedules that maybe HR is not working the same schedule, or maybe they're off site or not in a central location. And so these challenges all pose some obstacles for that communication, for communicating benefits from the HR professional to the deskless worker. And we actually did find in our research that half of HR professionals said that it was at least moderately difficult to reach the deskless worker about their benefits, and half are actively working to address this. And so, kind of turning to how to address this, I think it's important to know that like it's not a one size fits all solution, like many things in the workplace. We know that many of the strategies that work best for desk-based workers, like email campaigns or webinars, might not work for the deskless worker. What what will work is really going to depend on what your deskless workers' jobs look like on a day-to-day basis. And you might have that might also differ within the deskless worker umbrella. So I think the task really is to think about when and where you might have an opportunity to get this information out. And really, you could think about things like what can you do beyond email? Maybe it's actually low tech, like flyers in a break room or an integrated benefits app. Or even maybe you're using personal email addresses to get that information to your workers.
Solid advice. I love that. And so we know one of the biggest parts of challenges for deskless workers is these scheduling problems. It's just the way these types of jobs are. It's a very difficult industry here and there to not only have enough talent to fill a lot of these different shifts, overnights, mornings, evenings. I personally worked all of them. I've done 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I've done 2 p.m. to midnight, and all the above. So it definitely can take a toll on people mentally and physically, and even just trying to schedule things in a personal life that can be a challenge, especially when there's not a lot of talent and you need to be pulled on to help cover things, because in the healthcare industry can't just have no nurses on the floor. Um, so the report found that scheduling practices are really effective when it comes to that retention strategy. So could you explain how they could contribute to retention, and exactly let's pull these people managers back in, how they can play a role in implementing them because they are so important.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you so much for highlighting that, because we talked about compensation and benefits, but that's definitely not the only retention strategy. And also with this group, like you said, scheduling is really effective. But we did find that the extent to which organizations are using scheduling practices as a retention strategy or engaging in specific types of scheduling practices really varies. We asked about things like providing consistent number of hours week to week, predictable schedules. Those are both highly effective and more common. But things like giving employees input into their schedules, giving advance notice on schedules, allowing for more flexibility, those are also highly effective, but less common. As I mentioned before, right? This is just so different from an office-based environment. And so this is an area where organizations really can jump in and make some changes potentially. And we know managers play a key role in that. So when we also surveyed managers as part of this research. So specifically managers who manage deskless workers. And they reported that, scheduling practices are often driven by them. So things like compensation and benefits, those tend to be more driven by HR, by the organization. But when we look at scheduling practices, they're the ones on the front line. They're the ones who are creating those schedules oftentimes. But doing so often comes with its own challenges. So we actually ask managers, what are your biggest challenges in retaining Deskless workers on your team? And the most commonly cited challenges were maintaining fairness as well as budget. But kind of digging deeper into that maintaining fairness piece, which I thought was really interesting as a challenge, is this idea that if managers are really involved in these scheduling practices, well, it sometimes can be difficult to maintain that fairness across the team. So if you're granting flexible schedules where you're allowing employee input into schedules, maybe 5 people asked for a Friday off. Well, how do you make sure you maintain fairness in that process? And so really important for HR to equip, train, and support managers in this. And I think here it really just shows that retention doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's really a collaboration, a partnership between HR and managers, as well as others across the organization. And we really explore more of that in the full report. So I definitely encourage you to take a look.
Yeah, you're hitting so close to home for me. I getting flashbacks to the last several years of my career. It just definitely the fairness part. I remember people trying to, fight over like just making sure they're not on call on a weekend. And I remember the group of reporters I would work with. We would actually sit down together sometimes and just go over the next few weeks because a couple people would have requested time off and they want to make sure somebody can cover them. And we would all try just individually as workers, try to help them, cover their shifts or volunteer so that maybe they can volunteer for us a few months later when we have something going on. So I think that's great. And I think managers could definitely play a big part. It's a challenge, but it's not impossible for sure. So I would love to leave our audience off with just kind of one final thought from you, especially, as this report digs into so much detail. Was there anything that stood out to you that may have been surprising or something you really want our audience to take away from here?
Yeah, so I think as just a last thought, I just want to emphasize that for everyone listening, you know your workforce best. The ideas that we've shared today, the ideas we've outlined in the report, they're all great starting points. It's always great to be armed with data and understand what's going on among your peers, among other organizations that are grappling with some of these issues. But so many of the strategies we talked about today, the things we talked about today, will need to be tailored to your organization's unique needs, your deskless workers' unique needs, and in localizing some of these strategies can really be beneficial.
And remember, they make up 70 to 80% of the workforce. So keep in mind, this is a big deal. This is not a small thing we were talking about. So thank you so much, Ragan. Your insight is truly invaluable. And, thank you to the collaboration with Fidelity Investments as well. It really is an in-depth analysis of these workers, and it's super important. So thank you so much for providing your insight today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of All Things Work. To learn more, just head to shrm.org/allthingswork, and you can sign up for our newsletter as well. And also catch us on SHRM social media. Like, share, comment. We want you to be part of the conversation. That's it for this week. We'll catch you next time.
SHRM.